Right. Give it a little second here. All right, we are going live. So I just want to get this started. I know everybody's going to be popping on here. Thank you. Q Loves You coming to you live. I'm your host, one of the hosts for tonight, Q. Thank you all for joining us in this very, very special Mindful Monday. It's going to be a great show. We're going to get to it pretty quickly here. Very excited, very excited. I'm going to go ahead and introduce my other co-host here, is one of my favorite people.
Hey, what's happening, Huey, Louie? What's happening?
Hey, how you doing, buddy?
What's going? I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited. We have a good show tonight, and it's some good vibes, positive energy. Talked about a lot of insane stuff and the future and all that shit.
Well, you know, and that's it. We've been talking the last few weeks. For those who've been following the show, we've been all the way up and down and having to do with a lot of things, America, and this certainly is going to follow suit. You know, a lot of people see it. Oh, it's a song. We're going to talk about wine. Yeah, there's a lot more we're going to talk about.
A lot more. A lot of things going on in it. Yeah, a lot of things
that relate to the world as it is. So, I'm going to go ahead and get into the introduction for our guest tonight. A very, very special guest. He is Master Sommelier, and we'll call him Master Sommelier. One of roughly 250-ish in the world for now. Phenomenal individual. I guess you'd call him a documentary star of the cult classic on Netflix, the trilogy, SOMM. They got SOMM, SOMM 2, SOMM 3. I think he's a business owner, Vitical Wine Club. It's an online club. It's fantastic. Also was 40 Under 40 wine enthusiast tastemakers. Phenomenal individual, absolutely brilliant. One of my favorite people. I've known him for a little while. Everybody, introducing Brian McCLINTIC. Brian McCLINTIC, come on in. Say hi.
You forgot hell of a golfer, Q.
Come on.
I'm a terrible golfer. That's not true.
I know you. Now I know. What's up, Brian? How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. How are you?
Doing well. You're looking good, man. You're looking sharp. That beard is
yeah.
Kicking.
Yeah, I'm definitely letting things go a little bit.
Yeah?
Huh?
You're looking good. No way.
Out
man.
there in the sticks, baby. That's what you got to do.
This is the Jackson Hole, Wyoming special. So you have a log cabin backdrop. You gotta represent.
Well, you know, I had that last week on my virtual background. So I mean, you're lucky. You actually got it. So that's amazing. It's amazing. So thank you so much for taking the time out. I know you've been busy and doing. You literally are taking the time. Yeah, you're literally out in the sticks a little bit right now, and boy, it's beautiful. I saw the Grand Tetons sitting back there. You've showed that. I know the view's not there right now where you're sitting, but earlier, absolutely gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the front porch.
Yeah, you're on. Okay, so
do you guys want to see the view of West Covina? Hold on a second. Let me show you. No.
You're in West Covina?
No. I'm in Santa Monica. Just kidding.
Oh, wow.
Kidding. But that's where you kind of come from, right? Over that, like.
I was born in East Los Angeles and grew up in Rosemead, so not far from West Covina.
Yeah. Well, so I just triggered.
Well, yeah. Well, we're gonna get into that in a second. We'll jump ahead a little bit, but I just want to talk about the connection between how we got to this point, which is probably about making, which is odd that I'm sitting here when I was in the restaurant world, sitting here now doing a show, and you've been around the block and all the way up and down the line. But I think we met like 2009, something like that, at a Christmas party, I think, or something, maybe something around those lines. Mike and Alicia Villas, right? Yeah. It was something around those lines. Was it 9 or 10?
Was it 09?
09 or 08, maybe even. I don't even know.
Yeah, maybe a bit earlier.
Might have been, yeah, but it was before. Earlier. It was before you had gone, I think, advanced or any of that stuff. I think you met them in part of their tasting group, and your friends and their friends. Then they also own 2 wineries, right? Maison d'Ami and Pennville. Their partners were some of your best friends, and actually, so you guys all became friends. And then SOMM was actually kind of the idea, I think, was built around that, right? Like, ended up the idea spawned somewhere in that household or around that household during that time.
Yeah, I think it incubated. I Jason Wise, the director, was a bartender in the city of Orange, and his good friend Nikolai, who's the Romanian assassin in Costa Mesa, he's part of Maison d'Ami, like the nicest guy ever. But he actually connected Jason and I. So we through that mutual relationship, Jason kind of ended up in that circle, and we drink wine all night and talk about film. And
he was at Chapman too, right? I mean, one of my exes went to Chapman Film School.
That's right.
which is
That's
absolutely
right.
a brilliant. For those that don't know, Chapman's a phenomenal film school, one of the best premier schools, I think, for what they have. But to see what happened with that and the whole release, we'll get into that a little bit further down the line too. But I just want to say that all of a sudden you've gone through your ranks, and we're sitting here. You're up in Wyoming. I'm done with the restaurant business, and now we're sitting here on a Zoom call in the middle of a
It is ironic.
Pandemic. Yeah.
and you
I
are.
knew this would happen.
Yeah. And so we'll get into the whole SOMM thing too, but we're going to take it back a little bit. I guess Patrick already touched on it. We're going to go back to, well, you're a city boy.
Yeah.
LA boy, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Like you're one of those people that like, no, it's like when you live in Los Angeles, like no one's from here. You're actually from here.
I'm actually from LA. What's really interesting is, and I think we might have talked about this at one point, but if you do the ancestry.com thing, like my entire family lineage, like before my parents, and my father even grew up on a farm, is just like agriculture all the way to like the 1300s.
Wow.
And then, you know, my dad grew up on a farm in West Virginia and then tried to do the acting thing in LA. Met my mom, but my mom's mom was plucked out of a Syrian village. And she like, you know, like there were farm animals and she knew how to make her own yogurt and like all these things. So,
so you're Syrian. So you're Syrian. That's what we're talking about too.
I'm Syrian and my father's Irish, but like it was farmer was in my DNA, and it just skipped one generation. And so it took me a while to like reconnect with what I think is in my blood.
Well, you know, that's funny because like people don't understand that like they're like Syrian peppers that are like some of the best in the world. I mean, there's like a lot of good produce and stuff that comes from that part of the world, but you know, we don't see it here, but it's like it's becoming kind of a hipster thing to have like that kind of food. And you know, obviously it's been really tough for them in the last decade, obviously.
100%. Those were my Thanksgivings. Like everybody had turkey, and I was having this like kibbe with like pine nuts and onions and pepper and like grape leaves and like all these like super flavorful dishes. And then I'd go to like a friend's house for Thanksgiving. I'm like, oh man, this turkey is bland. Like, what
so wait, do you know my mom?
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, so I mean, so you're a kid, you got all this lineage, but I mean, what were you doing as a kid? What's like, I mean, it's just, how'd you go from city then to kind of, I mean, was it in your blood? Were you playing around as a kid, like messing around with sticks and stones? And
that's really funny because I was working as an adult. I was working in vineyards just to try to like get to know more about the craft, you know, put myself in the winemaker's position because I'm building out these custom bottling side by side. So I just wanted to like, you know, enrich myself that way. And I'm sitting in the vineyards like, you know, it's around this time of day, it's dusk, and I'm just doing field work and I'm thinking about like, why does this feel familiar? And then all of a sudden, all these memories came back to when I was a kid at like 5, 6, 7 years old. And we lived in like a shitty condo complex. There was no backyard. It was just asphalt.
Yeah.
It was like the HOA, like, you know, beautified flowers in the front.
Oh,
and
God.
I would just sit there and like watch flower petals open and like dig in the dirt and like look for insects. And that became like very attractive to me. I even remember like if I went to I went to Michael Jordan's basketball camp in Elmhurst, Illinois.
Oh, nice.
Sure.
And
that's my turf.
I know, Chicago, baby.
It was only because my mom was teaching a class at Elmhurst College. And then I had this like downtime where she was teaching this class and I'd run all over the campus and they'd have like trees with all the names of the trees on it. And I'm just like, I started to get fascinated. I'm like, oh, that's a birch. That's what it looks like. So then I like, you know, grew up and then forgot about all that. And it wasn't until I started getting into vineyards that all those memories kept flooding back. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, that feels right.
Well, and so, but you almost played sports too, didn't you? Weren't you a baseball player or something like that? Speaking of basketball a little bit, weren't you diving into?
Yeah. I played college baseball, and just managed to have 2 reconstructive surgeries. Okay, cool. Yeah, and it ended up. It was always nice to be outdoors. I mean, I literally majored in baseball. Like I somehow got an accounting degree out of the deal, but
wow.
Yeah, I that from age 5 to 23, 24, that was like it for me. But I just
are you still into baseball? Like, who's your team? Dodgers?
I'm not. And I'm like off it. And I like really love the sport and I love to see it played well. I grew up a Dodger fan. I was in front of the TV cheering when Gibson hit that home run in '88.
Yeah.
So that's dating me for your millennial viewers. They're like,
But you're
yeah,
24. That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was a big moment for someone coming from LA who, a 12-year-old kid who ate bread, breathed and slept baseball. So yeah, I was into it, but now, no, I don't know. I kind of like, I have very different, maybe unorthodox views that are slightly half-baked about competition and what athletics could be and might mean.
Well, and
Right.
also, sorry to say it again too. You have, growing up in LA, you grew up during a unique time too, talking about ideas and feelings. You grew up in Big Point was 80s, 90s, being in was it early 90s?
Yeah. Early 90s was high school for me.
And and you had an interesting time. We were talking about that too, just talking about kind of the being Syrian.
Oh yeah. I had a few incidents of microaggression. It's one of those things where you grow up in East Los Angeles and it's a melting pot. And
right.
where I grew up, there was Hispanic and Asian, and there's a huge Japanese contingent because my parents taught inner city, and they taught predominantly Hispanic people, and I thought we were rich. My parents made maybe $30,000 a year.
Wow.
And they, but that back then you could afford a home and you could.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
But I saw the slums that they were teaching, and I'm like rich. Like that was the worldview I had growing up, which was really important. And then, grew up with people of color, Black, Hispanic. There were members of the people who my mom taught with, who were Japanese, and they became like part of the family. They would be there at Christmas, so it was just like really, that was who I felt close with and connected to. And I had white friends growing up too. And most of my schooling was that way, but it wasn't until high school where I really saw that, the white affluence played out, because I went to San Marino High School, which is like this kind of bubble of really heavy affluence. And, not to fault the kids, because they're often a product of what they've been exposed to.
Right.
But, this was the Persian Gulf War in 1992, and, tie a yellow ribbon around the oak tree type thing. And
yeah,
people were not high on Arabs if you were white and affluent and had certain political views. And so when the kids sniffed out that I was Arabic, what started as like just mild teasing became a little bit more aggressive. I was called pretty much every name in the book, and sometimes they'd throw rocks at me and stuff like that. And none of my friends would do that, but I think those microaggressions are just a drop in the bucket compared to what people of color, specifically Black America, deals with. But it was that little taste was enough to totally fuck me up. And like to this day, I have issues with, and in wine circles, there's so much, like white affluence, especially.
No.
When certain people are not worthy to sit at the table, that whole vibe, like I'm just like, I'm out. I can't deal with this.
Yeah.
And so,
so it's interesting. It's interesting how it give you that little taste of something for where we're at now. I mean, it also
distorted my view of racism, because I think like racism is like levels. Like everybody has prejudices, and so if everybody has prejudice, then there's aspects of everybody that have potential racism. And racism doesn't need to be like I hate Black people, or I think it's all the Mexicans, or that's overt racism. But there's also a form of racism that is complicit, or that believing everybody's on an equal playing field, or believing that we're all on equal footing and race is colorblind. I mean, that's kind of the world I grew up in. And because I had this cultural upbringing, I felt like I didn't have any privilege, or I was, I was somehow excluded from conversations of race, when the reality is I have a gigantic platform within the wine world, and it's shockingly devoid of people of color, especially the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous people of color. So I think George Floyd was a wake up call for a lot of people, certainly me as well.
Yeah. Wow.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Well, it's just like, you know, when I hear people tell stories about their parents, it's like, those are real jobs. Like that was a real job to teach kids, you know, and there's got to be like a lot of success stories that they had, you know, in those tough corners of, you know, the world, whether it's the city of Los Angeles or out in the middle of nowhere. But that had to like kind of affect your mindset today. Like it's, you know, because you know, you can only hang out with like white guys boasting about the most expensive wines they've ever had for so long.
Well, and I gotta, and you'd have to think also having your parents teaching in that, and you also experiencing this over here is a very unique dynamic to be getting different angles of vibes and energies and stories from things that are going on. I mean, you're seeing it by, you know, you're seeing it without being there. Also, I'm sure your parents have stories of things that were going on, and it makes you, yeah, I'm sure there's a few little stories, right?
Yeah, I mean, my parents were from another generation. My dad had me when he was 40. He was born in 1935 in West Virginia. So
wow,
very few people born in that. We're always a product of our geography in a lot of ways, and especially in a small rural town where there's not a lot of diversity culturally. I mean, that's almost a hopeless situation for you to pull yourself out of, especially when you're poor and you're in a farming family and you work 15 hours a day. It's like a get it done mentality.
Right.
You know, like somehow he got out of that. I mean, he was in the Army and then he traveled and got into theater, and then it, you know, took a more liberal path. But like very few people are able to see past their own upbringing, and including people who are born in a liberal scenario too. You know, there's often a lack of empathy for the other side. So yeah, it was really interesting having them, you know, like tell me about the experiences. I mean, they were around when schools were segregated, like things that I would be like, that's unthinkable. And then we don't even look at our own generation and realize what the next generation is going to say about us, right? Because there's always something.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
So were you hanging out in LA, like the city, like in your late teens, 20s? Like, you know, I was hanging out in Chicago where I grew up, like partying, hanging out and going to concerts and like, you know, being the city guy, or what was that like? You know, or did you just go baseball?
It was baseball until I was about 24, and I took a stint in Pasadena City College and LA City College. Lived in Echo Park in '98, and you know, now it's one of the most like up and coming gentrified hotspots.
Yes, it is.
Back then it was rough. It was
like Rampart, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had cockroaches and bars and like, yeah, correctional facility right there. You walk across the street, you don't look people in the eye. You're just like, we had a convicted felon next to us. He's like, "Hey, bro, can I use your phone?" He's like, "You got any weed?" Like it was there was some colorful folk at that time, and no, it was I went down to Orange County and finished up 4-year university down there, and ended up kind of just staying down there until about 2009, because I met Q down in Orange County,
right, and
then that kind of spawned into this wine trail.
Well, yeah, and how old were you when you really jumped in, when you started working? When you started working in the vineyards, that's when you kind of started doing that trail. How old were you when that popped off then?
So that would be 2000, when I really started to play with it, 2014. That was kind of the beginning. I had a wine bar in Santa Barbara, and on weekends, sometimes I would go up and do some vineyard work. And so when we're talking about remembering all those childhood memories of being in nature, that's when it really started. So I had already passed my Master Sommelier exam.
Well, when did you start getting the wine aspect then? How old were you really started digging into the wine?
So like right when we were hanging out, like the economy crashed in 2008, and I was like, I need to provide it. I was married at the time, and we were not in a very good financial situation. If you worked in restaurants, Man, I mean, it's not as bad as it is now, but it was bad back then when your best customers who are in the mortgage business are now applying for jobs as waiters, and you're like, sorry, man, I don't have any shifts.
Yep.
Like, you were my best customer. It was a very weird time and a very scary time, I think,
it was
for people. So I was motivated to make a change, and somehow, you know, my wife at the time, she was like, you know, you do well, you sell wine on the floor well. I'd memorized all the Napa cabs at the steakhouse and could just rattle off a soundbite from the winery website.
Right.
You know, but it was pretty hollow. If someone said like, oh, tell me about this Bordeaux, I'm like, oh, French. You know, so I decided to, you know, the Orange County was, especially at that time, a little bit of a cultural bubble that way in terms of like true sommelier community, and the only real mecca was Napa Rose in Disneyland. Strangely enough,
that's Michael Jordan, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I had waited on him. And
not Mike, for everybody watching, it's not Michael Jordan, the basketball player. Michael Jordan, the sommelier.
No, they look very different.
Yeah.
But he was like, you know, I called him out of the blue. I said, hey, I waited on you one time, and you told me if I ever get into wine, like, I should call you. He's like, yeah, meet me Thursday. And he had this sommelier training ground. And so I walked in there, and there was this dude named Stephen Poe who was like an ex Marine guy who had fought on the front lines. I forget what war. I think it was Persian Gulf. And he was studying a map of Bulgaria or Croatia or something. I'm like, there's wine there? He's like, oh yeah, dude, you got to know everything. I'm like, how hard is this test? And he's like, and he got like real like nom on me. He's like, I fought on the front lines. I jumped out of helicopters, you know, like people died in my arms, like this type of speech. And he's like, I can't pass this fucking test.
Wow.
I'm like, I am in the wrong room. And then I watched him do a blind tasting of 3 white wines and 3 red wines and go through this whole grid that if you've ever seen the SOMM documentary, it's spelled out, and he just nailed every single wine and ended up passing 3 months later, unbeknownst to him at the time. But I just
masters or
he passed the MS exam. Yeah. And so,
wow.
And so I was listening to him talk about, you know, flocculence and sediment and, you know, decaying rose petals. And I'm just looking around the room going, I'm a baseball player. Like I sell wine to steakhouse. And I told Michael Jordan, I'm like, this isn't for me. Thank you. And he goes, shut up and just take notes. And so I ended up doing that. And, you know, the reality is like a human being can decipher 10,000 different smells. And if you have that DNA, then, and you want to spend your Fridays analyzing wine.
Well, your Monday through Sundays.
Yeah. Then it'll happen. Eventually you'll develop a vocabulary.
So did you, you know, there's like a cliche, like I had a drink of blah, 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 and it changed my life. It's like, did you have one of those moments, or were you just like, well, try this?
I had a few moments. One was like, you know, in the very beginning, can you tell the difference between a $5 wine and a $500 bottle of wine? Because everything just smelled and tasted like wine. And then someone poured a $500 bottle of wine for me. I'm like, oh, okay, that's different. You know, yeah.
What was the wine?
Yeah, it was probably like some old Bordeaux, like Margaux or something.
Yeah.
And then there's that moment where like you've drank in all these New World wines and someone pours you something from France. You're like, oh, there's this other place that makes wine.
Yeah.
And they're pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And so you get into European wine, all of a sudden you're bouncing everywhere. But at the time, you know, when kind of SOMM got going and when I got going, there was nothing but Napa Cab in existence, really.
Yeah. Still kind of like that in a way.
Yeah.
But wait a second. So like you contact this guy, he says, sit down, take notes. And then you're talking to a guy who's talking about Bulgaria and all this. I mean, where was the middle ground or the beginning? Where's like the tilt-a-whirl before you get on the Screaming Eagle roller coaster of like the intensity of it? Like, where's the, you know, I mean, how long did you walk in the door and then go, I'm a master?
Honestly, it felt like there was no middle ground. From that moment on, everything fell into place. Like imagine
just go.
Imagine like you roll to the roulette table and you're like, I'm going like 00. You know what I mean? Like, and like you hit it 7 times in a row. That's how that path happened. And it happened so fast. And I remember like in the very beginning, like, remember he's like, shut up and listen and take notes. And for 2 months I took notes. And then one day he's just like, all right, you're tasting with me. And he lined up 3 white wines, and I'd never done it before, but I'm like, oh, fuck. So I just went through, was in the zone. And at the end of it, he's like, you nailed every single wine. You went 6 for 6. He's like, I'm going to really like hone in on you and focus on you and work with you. The next day he was gone and someone did the same thing for me. And I went 0 for 6. But every time I was in front of him, I was like, I nailed everything. And so that kind of shit happened. Like, it was like, you know, I'm beating my head against the wall, like doing other things. The economy crashes. I'm like, this is working. I'm just going to go through this door. And from the moment I took my intro to the time I passed my master, 2.5 years had expired. And I'd maybe worked as a sommelier twice on the floor.
Wow.
The rest of the time I was a waiter.
Wow.
So like it was really too fast. And I don't think anybody could even do that the way the test wouldn't even allow it.
Right. Because think about it. It's like, there are guys who it takes them 10 years to get to like the 3rd level. You know what I mean? And it's like, I mean, and that just seems like I'll meet people that are like pretty young who are master somms. I'm like, how can you know this stuff already? It's so like, there's like, this is an onion that has like 1,000 layers. It's
100%.
Like, how could you even like, that's why so I was starting to feel like, okay, maybe this stuff is a little bit, I don't know. I mean, is it because of the mentor guy that like, I mean, because the way you're explaining this, you are a savant. You're not just a master somm, but you're like a savant because time.
Well, I think like you're saying about having a mentor. I mean, having someone like that around to have you under the wing, right? I mean, that's a huge.
Yeah, but that's like Yoda. I mean, it's like 2 years to figure that stuff out. I mean, I've been doing this stuff for years and years. It's still like,
it's true. Yeah, there's definitely a savant aspect.
It's possible to hit a bunch of coin flips, and that's what happened. You know, I ended up with the right people. I wasn't even supposed to take the master exam, except for the fact that I had moved to Aspen and was working there. And Jay Fletcher was the chairman of the Court of Master Sommeliers, and I was tasting with him regularly. Someone canceled at the last minute 2 weeks before. He's like, you want in? I'm like, yep, go. And so like, I mean, it's like, it's who you know, it's like all these people helping you out. And like, my mother's an educator. And so I understood how to take a test, and I understood like the mental game from sports. Like, I'd been in a lot of pressure situations in college. And so, you know, as nerve wracking as this test was, because it really was, you know, I was able to, I feel like, utilize a lot of the experiences that I'd had earlier in life that really came in handy at the right time.
Well, one of the biggest things that I used to, during my hiring practices, that I thought were really important was when I'd ask people if they played sports. I mean, the idea of just being under pressure. I played sports, a lot of sports growing up, and all the same thing. The pressure aspects, understanding teamwork, and understanding, you know, hard work and getting it done. It's a lot of aspects.
Especially baseball, because baseball's slower. Yeah. You know, a lot of other sports, there's this, you know, very quick reaction that the game happens so fast that, you know, clutch or not, you don't have a lot of time to think. And baseball is so methodical. And a lot of this test, like, it's getting in your head, you know, type stuff where you're waiting and waiting and waiting, and then you finally go in the room. And so that can mess with a lot of people.
And a lot of theory and so, right. Yeah. And method in general, right? I mean, you were saying, hold on, what was I going to say? Sorry about that. You were talking earlier about, blank. Go ahead. Never mind.
You know what? Let me ask a question. So you do this in 2.5 years. I mean, and then I'm going to go a little bit ahead, but then you do the SOMM documentary, and it's like, you know, blah, 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 blah. Everybody wants to, I mean, did it get harder after all that stuff? Did they make it harder? Because you're describing it as like,
did the test get harder?
Yeah. Because
absolutely.
It's like,
it continues to get harder, but like, you know, I think that was the last possible era where someone like me could have slipped through the cracks.
Right.
Because that lack of seasoning that you were talking about is vetted now by the structure of the exam. There's no way, you know,
because they want to get the money out of those people.
Well, I mean,
like, it takes a
just
while to get through those.
wanted to improve the test and make sure that there weren't any holes, and there were holes back then.
Right.
Oh,
Because when I started to do it, like they were like, "Hey, come on in, you're great," and then like later on, they're like, "Don't look at me, don't look at me," it's like, well, like they had that sort of like, "We will crush you," kind of vibe. It was very odd because they went from one vibe to the opposite.
well,
Do you think?
and still like to be a master somm though. I mean, you still need the mentorship aspect and somebody to sign off on you and all that stuff though now, either way, right? So there, like you said, the scrutiny may be a little bit harder. I mean, because is there a lot more people jumping on board of the wine? I mean, considering 20 years ago, there was, I mean, I remember when we were back there, I mean, Opus back in the 90s was a big deal. I'm not saying it isn't now, but now the people's thresholds and understanding of wine and their intelligence and their knowledge has expanded so much. That has expanded so much. There's a lot more people coming in on the test, and I think in the industry in general. So I don't know. It seems like now there'd be a lot more. You have to be tighter, and you have to have that mentorship, or else, that's how the super vet comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, you're like at this time talk about like situations that come together. It's like all of a sudden they're making a documentary and you're in it. And I don't think you told me you didn't really mean to be.
No, I think when Jason and I started talking in the summer of 2009 about it, I gave him a bio of 50 people across the country, and he originally wanted to do it with a female, and she did not want to be on camera. And so he's like, I need to find, because Jason really wanted to make like the wine version of Pumping Iron. He was like, he loves this idea of obsession, and he wanted to find this obsessed person. And the moment I introduced him to Ian Cobble, like that's when he's like, this is the person. Yeah. And I was in Aspen at the time. Ian was in Half Moon Bay in the Bay Area. And so they already started like filming with him while Jason was trying to raise funds. And I'm over in Aspen. I'm like, good for you, man. You're going to go make a movie. I'm glad I could help out in any small way. And then it just so happened that Dustin and I were working at the Nell, both got simultaneous job offers in San Francisco. And then all of a sudden our tasting group is me, Ian, and Dustin. And then Dylan's flying in from Dallas, Texas to, cause he had work out there, and he got hired by Penfolds, which is based in San Francisco. So, or at least in Napa. So yeah, it just, Jason didn't have a budget. And so he's like, if I follow this one guy, I can't like do 4 other people throughout the country. I can't afford that. So it was just like, this is the tasting group I was handed. And so I ended up in the film kind of haphazardly.
Wow. Because the thing is, you may say it's Ian, but I think you were the one that like, are like, is a big part of the motivators. Yeah. Like, I mean, thousands of people took these SOMM tests because of you and what you did in that movie. I mean, it's like, how does that make you think like, people must come up to you, hey man, I love wine because of you and you're the greatest. And I
still get the emails and the DMs and the texts. And it's really gratifying to know that film had such a profound effect on people. And it was overwhelming at the time. I was, by the time it came out, I was I had a wine bar in Santa Barbara, and people would come in 10 times a day. It was like, oh my God, someone would be like, oh, and they wouldn't even go in there knowing I was there. They're like, I just saw you on an airplane or I just watched it on Netflix. Were you that guy? And it was like, that's crazy how many, there's like 7 million downloads on iTunes, and then Netflix hit, the film really did well. There was a zeitgeist with it. And
it's still the wine documentary of documentaries still for a lot of people.
And a lot of it has to, because it's like in any good movie, it's like you want to like the protagonist, which I think, you provided that more so than the other guys. And I'm not trying to take away from the other guys because they all fit, except for Fred Dame. That guy's really annoying. No, but it was a great documentary. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I watched the third one, which was like watching Jaws 4. I was like, okay, enough. You know what I mean? It's like, I thought you were very, legitimate in like the way you describe things, but it gets a little bit where it was almost cartoony, you know what I mean? Where in the beginning it was a really good, entertaining, like competitive documentary. which is
Well,
what you want.
there's a SOMM 4 coming out, so you'll have to.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine what. Yeah, I can't imagine what stop. I think
Right.
keep going.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
I'll wait
Friday-
when
what are they on
SOMM
Friday?
8 comes.
I
I'll
was
wait
just
for
saying,
SOMM 8.
Friday the 13th's got like 14, don't they, or something like that?
They
Right.
do.
Right.
Maybe it'll be like Batman Begins, where like Christopher Nolan does a whole new take or something.
Right. It's a lot of somming. Let's put it that way.
It's wine tasting on mushrooms. They do a whole separate, trippy version or something like that. It'd be great.
And so you become a somm, and then all of a sudden you're some like pretty young hip dude. Like you did the sports angle. I mean, it's that takes a lot of intensity. You crush this thing in a couple of years, and now you're like hanging out like in the players club, with all these like middle-aged white guys. Like do they say like, come here, we want to show you the cave where no one can go? It's like, what happens? Like,
what's the password?
What do you get to see without? I know you don't want to like
no incriminating.
Yeah, what's in the bat cave?
Well, like I never thought about anything other than passing this test. When the economy crashed, I was very externally motivated, and you don't really think about why you're doing it. You're just like, I know if I pass this test, that my salary doubles. Like I could command a 6-figure salary, and that was the motivation for me at the time. That's how I thought, and I'm like, I want to provide, and I want to make X amount of money, and I don't want to be in a situation where, economically I'm in that position again where I'm in debt and struggling. And so, once you pass, all of a sudden you're like, you realize now what? Like the friends that you've been studying with, I'm like, do we actually have anything in common? Because all we were talking about was this test the entire time.
Wow.
So we got this like trench warfare, and we're bonded. And Ian's a good friend, and we have like both have retail businesses, so we've stayed in touch. I spoke to him the other day, but it's once I started to realize that personally the route I wanted to go in my life was the opposite of these external achievements. I started to have this shift spiritually towards, what if these external things are just ways that I can grow as a human being, so it's this idea of business development, team of investors, you're building out 5-year projections. It's very external, right? There's goals set. For me, it's the opposite. It's businesses developing me. So the decisions I make are not necessarily in the best fiscal interest. And you can only really do that if you own a company outright. And I shoestringed a $30,000 loan and somehow ended up with the company. But I'm in a privileged position to be able to make this about personal growth and a business developing me. So if that's the priority, then how do I want to develop? Well, I knew I wanted to travel. I knew I wanted to get out, and I hadn't really. And so I knew I wanted to live in Europe. I knew I wanted to speak another language. And so I started checking these boxes. And when I started thinking of what the business could look like, I'm like, well, I need to create reasons to be in Europe. I need to create, and I can't do that in a brick and mortar retail shop. It has to be online. I care about my health, so let's make it organic. Let's do custom bottlings with the collaborations with the winery. So I really have a reason to go there. And that's an absolute business expense. And so I built the model out of ways that I knew I wanted to grow. And what ended up happening is these were kind of superficial, selfish, like ways that I wanted to grow, right? I wanted to like live in France and like, go here and go there, but they ended up starting to shape other ideas that I think were far more, let me try to brighten this.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you that actually, if there was any lighting over there.
That were I think far more resonant and far less self-centered. Like, I when you work with organic producers and you look at harvest records from Napa all the way to the French Alps and beyond in Austria, it was the same story. They had harvest records from the 70s, and they pick in the same vineyard, same grapes, same time now, 2 to 3 weeks earlier. So you couldn't ignore climate change.
Right.
at all. And I'm
Right.
like, I can't stop ignoring this issue that no one's talking about. And I'm like, what's causing climate change? And I happened to speak to a Nobel Peace Prize winner for soil science who said that when you till the soil, when you plow it and remove all the grasses and the ground cover, you're releasing carbon into the atmosphere. He's like, ag alone accounts for 10 to 15% of carbon emissions total, including the fossil fuel industry.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow. And then people are saying, well, that's not all. You're also removing all the life out of the vineyard, and your species are dying off. There's nothing for bees to pollinate now. And instead of just clearing the land, people are also spraying all these chemicals and herbicides and, glyphosate. People are winning. Can you imagine someone suing the tobacco industry for causing cancer and winning? People are suing Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer, for glyphosate, which is Roundup, on these cancer cases, and winning.
Well, they just that's what they just.
By the way, I did a wine tasting for Bayer, the Monsanto thing. So they did not give a shit.
California just lost a major lawsuit that Bayer was trying to go ahead and put warnings on about Roundup, and they just lost. California lost against Bayer, so they don't have to put the warnings on there. Yeah,
unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
But let's go back a little bit. So, like I said, you pass this thing, you're in this movie. It's like, I mean, where's like the party, like in every movie about like a rock star or actor, it's like, then the partying started, or like, those things you see on the E channel. Then I started to go out every night and party. I mean, because I mean, Q and I have been in the business for a while. Like, there's always like drunken people, great booze, women. Best. I mean,
I wish I had these great. I wish I could regale you with these great tales, but I immediately launched a business in Santa Barbara and was married to that wine bar, and did nothing else. So there was no wild.
No rock star
nights with like A-list celebs or things like that.
Well, no, but I mean, it's because it's so funny that you're always 2 steps ahead of the next thing. It's like, oh, I'm this now, but you're not. Now something pulls you. I mean, it's a very unique situation because you keep getting pulled like to another thing. It's like there's definitely like a point to this journey. You know what I mean? And so, but before we go to that, which is an amazing journey, you're a SOMM and you're like, stuff happens and then you get to the point recently where you're like, I'm out of this. I do not want to do this anymore. This is not, I mean, like, what got you, like, emotionally, what got you to that?
I was going to ask, and I was going to say, I mean, are you talking about getting out of the court? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Because I mean, it's like, again, here we go. It's like he's done all the stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like, this isn't for me. I got to get out of this. Like,
well, I mean, Brian, I just kind of want to read. I mean, I know all these other things that obviously we're on the plate,
right.
But certainly, going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show. Now, do you mind if I read your opening of the letter?
No, shoot. I'm going to move into better light while you're doing that. Okay,
cool. So this is kind of the catalyst for. He resigned from the court of Master Sommelier. It's a resignation letter, which does not happen. And it's a big deal. And it's for multiple reasons like we're talking about right now. But first paragraph, it is with a heavy heart that I announce my resignation from the court of Master Sommeliers Americas. While I am 100% clear that this decision is in the best interest of myself and the court, the reasons are multifold, culminating in a simple affirmation of 3 words: Black Lives Matter. Very, very, very potent, very potent. And, I think the one thing I know we kind of just shifted, but that was a big plus. I mean, 2 things that I want to say about that. One, we go back to where you started from and what you dealt with and growing up in LA, right? That's a huge deal. But 2, you had a really cool Instagram post that I really thought was phenomenal. And it was about poison oak. And I do you remember it very well at all? Do you remember what it was and what you said?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I do.
I can go through it if you want.
It's indelible because the day I got poison oak, was the day George Floyd was killed. And when it happened to me, it happened right at the same time. And that sounds like, how is that connected at all? But I always feel like as I start to reintegrate with nature, which is my kind of my path right now, I feel like it teaches me things about the world and about social issues as much, because social issues are environmental issues. It's one and the same. So, you know, the thing about poison oak is I always thought I was immune because I would just brush up against it. I'd run and play in it, and I would be out in it, and nothing ever happened. And it wasn't until I fell off an oak log the same day George Floyd died, cut up my leg, that the poison oak got into my bloodstream.
Ugh.
And once it got into my bloodstream, my body recognized it as an irritant. And the moment it did, like all of a sudden you realize what poison oak can really do. Because I had this nasty rash and it was so brutal, and it was like there in my face. And so now I'm no longer immune because my body recognizes it as an irritant. So I have a different way of being now, right? I have to be careful about where I step. I have to think about, I have a protocol now, you know, and I can't just avoid the issue like it's not there. And I feel like racism is exactly the same thing. When I saw Floyd, up until then, I felt like I was immune to racism and my own acknowledgement of my privilege. And however, I was being complicit in not helping people of color integrate in the wine industry, etc., and not even really understanding the full like level of institutional racism in our country, which I'm just starting to scratch the surface educationally about. And the moment you see Floyd, that's you can't watch that video and not let that get under your skin.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
and from that moment on, racism became a big irritant and something I could not just avoid and somehow brush up against and, you know, not let it affect me. I was no longer immune after that moment. And so it's kind of profound because like I saw that parallel and made that Instagram post. And then when I thought about when I got the poison oak, I looked back at the calendar. I'm like, oh my God, it was the exact same day and almost the exact same time, which is really, really like woo woo.
Yeah. No.
But like,
listen, follow the signs. I mean, you know,
I feel that way. I feel like that way. And there's certainly clarity, I think, for me in the analogy, whether it resonates with other people or not.
Well, I think, I mean, we talked about this. I think it's absolutely resonates. I mean, you know, we'll talk about your podcast, the podcast a little bit later on, but talking about following all the signs and how they work for you, if specifically, I mean, like you said, whether it resonates for somebody else, it's working for you. You see it. Yeah. Not everybody else will, but you see it, and it affects you to a point where, affects you to a point where you start seeing things like you went behind the curtain. Now you're starting to see this whole life starts to come, right? You start to see things completely different. Well, not completely different because they were there, but you see it. And so you start having a feeling of not being aligned with your current status, right? I mean, with where you were working with in the wine world, you wanted to change, right?
Yeah. And how much time if you're a master, do you have to be like, go to the office or the mental office of like hanging out, being a part, voting on things? Because it's like a fraternity. So I would think you'd have to be in and out pretty often, or I don't know. Am I wrong?
You know, in terms of your commitments in the court, I think when I passed, there was a lot more pressure because there was just less people. But after the SOMM films came out, there was so many applicants, and it became this corporation that you know, you could kind of slip off into the background, you know, and kind of be wallpaper instead of being actively involved. And that started to happen. I think a couple of years ago, I started to get disillusioned because as I was inviting things into my life that felt connected to my growth, the ideals of the court were not resonating with me, whether I was fully aware of them or not. And, you know, it was really Richard Bett's decision. He was the first one who decided to resign. That made me even think like, oh, like, am I kind of I represent an organization. Like, do I really feel like I can help change from within and truly feel proud of this organization based on the set of values that I have? And it became a point of me really starting to ponder it. And then the Black Lives Matter thing was really as you read, was really the straw that broke the camel's back. Had it not happened, I still should have probably resigned, because I was so far off in a direction in so many different ways. But BLM really clarified it for me, because the stance was unclear at the time. And I just couldn't, I just felt that the change wouldn't come quick enough for me.
Well, what I got to say, what I appreciate, and everybody can go online and read the resignation letter. It's there, brilliantly written. But certainly well. one of the things that I appreciated was your humility and understanding where you could be better. You know, and I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of people don't do. I mean, we started this project, Mindful Mondays, months ago with the same idea, right? Trying to just be better, open your mind and see where can you be a better person and how can you evolve. Yeah. And I think it was one of the best parts about that letter, and you staying true to yourself. You know, the last paragraph, I'm going to read this too, and this is all we're going to read. But like I said, anybody can go online and read it. But the last paragraph to me really touched home, because even where I've come from in the restaurant world, it was aligned to this perfectly. Lastly, if your core values are at stake in the workplace or any affiliation, and you don't believe that it is within you to elicit meaningful change, you're not quitting by removing yourself from the situation. What you are doing instead is quitting the white noise that so often governs that way of life, an old way of life, in favor of your authentic self. That was the most brilliant ending. And I think it speaks to so many people. The conversations that I have with so many people about their careers and about their lives can relate to that nonstop. And I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's totally true.
And this way of life right now isn't so bad.
Yeah. But so what are you going to say to all those people that are like, hey man, I started doing this because of you, and then you're not in this anymore? Like, I mean, it's funny, because it's like I said earlier, you definitely motivated because of because of who you are, and what Q just read, I think, is one of the reasons why it's you bring a lot of people in. They're going to be like, dude, I just got this thing and now you're over here. I mean, it's funny, you know.
No, I don't worry about that, because there's always going to be those people who unfortunately don't get why you're doing it. But I do things for personal reasons. Yeah. And that may sound selfish. And I think a lot of people in the court feel that way, and I can understand it from their perspective. It's like, look, I'm fighting for change from within, and you just bail, you know. I understand that, you know, like, but I knew in my heart of hearts, this was time. It was time for me to go. And I genuinely feel that if you don't do things for personal reasons, that you can't, then you're not filled with the potential of light.
100%.
If you're not filled with that potential of light, then you don't have as much light to amplify to the rest of the world.
You got to take care of yourself first. Be that lighthouse and let it shine for everyone else to see.
Selfish, but honestly, I feel like radiates outward. There's two really big quotes that say that. Like I talked about this all the time. There's this Rumi quote that I live by that says, yesterday I was clever, so I tried to change the world. Today I'm wise and try to change myself. You know, and it's like, what I really take from that is if you're changing yourself, the world, you know, you probably are giving to the world that way. And I also listened to I read a quote today from Carl Jung, the famous analytical founder of psychology.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, he said something to the effect of, if the path in front of you is clear, it's probably somebody else's path.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic.
What about the doors of perception? Is everything as it appears as it is?
Give me a little Infinite. Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison.
Well, he didn't write that.
I know, but the doors.
Right. Yeah. That's, you know, but it's true. Like, once you get rid, and that's the thing, That's what's so funny about you, Brian, is that like you just like you seem to see everything like as it truly is. So it's like, hey, I'll do this, I'll go through that. Oh wow, that's really tough. Now I'm this, but I see this, and it's like I think that's really hard for people to see like that. I just don't. I think in this time we're all so like pre-programmed, and that's the thing I was going to say to you is that like when I see all these SOMM people, a lot of it looks like it's been cast. You know what I mean? Like a TV show. Like they're almost casting people for this thing. And that really bums me out because some of the best wine people I've ever met are like quirky, kooky, beautiful people who aren't the typical, you know, like because I mean, I'm sure you're not bummed about wearing a suit every time you go over to the HQ. And
Or
it's like, you know, that whole look, it's like because you don't have to be a sage or smart or wise to have to wear a suit and be this person. It's like that's one of the things I really liked about wine early on was that there were so many cool people that weren't like what the SOMM guys want you to be. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. And I think if you're on that, if you're on your own personal path, everybody's different. And so the more you kind of like chip away at that, the rock of you, you start to chisel this very specific, you know, authentic person who's just not the same as everybody else. I feel like that's everybody, honestly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of us have a herd mentality and and I've certainly been in this position where I'm the product of my geography, the product of the people around me, and they determine my values. And there's very little nuanced debate that comes out of that because it's very tribal. And I just, I just stopped conforming.
Well, and I think, one thing,
That felt very good.
And you know what's funny? But if I can interrupt, I took one of those SOMM tests, and you were one of the guys there. Of course, I didn't get to hang out with you because it's like, when it's like, oh man, I got the guy that's a dick. Great, it's like that's the nice guy, and you totally exuded nice guy, total energy. You were clean cut as all hell. I mean, you're not the guy you are today in terms of. And I'm like, why can't that's my bitch. It's like, why can't I get that guy? Come on. This is gonna suck. And it did. But it's so funny to think of you. And you know what? And the other thing, you took it 100%, and I could see you helping people, like, so none of this surprises me that you just kind of like grew up out of that, and it's like it's good. You're like wise beyond your years.
Well, I think Patrick, going back to what you were asking about how, when people look at them and say, oh, I've been following you, all of a sudden you bounce, you do all, you're out. I think it's just another leadership aspect that I think, when people see somebody that has put so much time and energy into something, make a change in such a grand format, it really gives people, a lot of people are scared to make change. Change is scary. And I think when you see somebody do something like this, I think it's definitely a lot of people out there that can learn to be okay with, having the balls and the cojones to make a jump like you did, man. And I think that's another leadership quality that a lot of people are going to learn a lot from. And certainly after reading that letter and the way that you've handled yourself thus far, and certainly the way of the things that you've got coming down the line that we're aware of, and the way that you're seeing your future. 10 years, people I don't think really understand when they will, but I think like you're going to be a guy 10 years down the line that people are going to be like, this guy did that. That's what I think from all the conversations and knowing you. So I'm stoked to see what you've got going on, and you've got some amazing, you're up there. Where do you have, Patrick, do you have something else you want to go? I was going to jump into.
Well, you know what? Yeah. You know what? There's one more thing, Brian, I want to talk to you about in the world of wine, because, it is $1 billion industry, and it's like, if we want to talk about Jim Morrison, like he really didn't like making money, you know what I mean? And never really used it. But the point is that there is so much money in wine, and like a big part of wine is how they score the wines. You know what I mean? Wine Spectator, Wine Advocate, Jeb Dunnick, these guys are, they're selling a lot of wine. And a lot of times the scores are like completely wonky from one another, or sometimes they're together. I mean, obviously when it's a very expensive, small vineyard, single vineyard kind of wine in a place like Bordeaux or Burgundy or whatever. And I mean, what do you think about that stuff? Do you think it's bullshit? Do you think it's like, I mean, Yeah, all that score stuff. I mean, because it's so all over the place that it's like, huh? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really.
Because there's a like there's a symbiotic or like a combined relationship between the Psalms drive that kind of quality of wine, and it's like that intensity, like I never really heard them talking about, cheapo stuff, but they were mostly talking about the most, elegant, cool wines in the world, and
Yeah,
that's kind of what the whole shtick is.
yeah. I mean, it's obviously very subjective.
You're not
And
going to see
you
Fred
know,
Dame talking about like something from Temecula. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah,
they're only going to talk about like world class wine. So I'll stop there. Sorry.
yeah. Well, I mean, are you asking about the 100-point scale? Are
Yeah,
you?
yeah, all
Yeah,
that stuff that
yeah.
like plays into it. It's like how much are people being taken? Is this just like a,
I
you
would
know?
hate to see, like, paintings in a museum have be graded on a 100-point scale. I mean,
There
something,
you
Oh,
go.
that's a great
There
answer.
you
That's a great answer.
in terms of
Yeah,
art appreciation, but at the same time, you know, wine is also a very hard thing for people to connect to. So I think some of those publications, like Wine Spectator, was the way I reached out to Richard Betts from who was a master sommelier, from a Wine Spectator article I read, and I reached out to Raj Parr, and that really helped me. And that was at the time in Orange County, points was really the only anchor I had, or I knew about, to get information about wine. And so, you know, I what I would like to see personally is a 100-point green score where, you know, something that's in terms of like sustainability in a vineyard and
Mm.
all the
yeah,
metrics, and then like cellar.
Carbon footprint and everything that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Something to that effect, to where, there's an environmental score also attached to, some of these publications who have gigantic viewers. I think they could end up doing a lot of good. So I
Well,
don't know.
and a friend of ours asked me to ask you a very specific question and said, as the producers are going more in the direction of biodynamic, organic, and vineyard management and winemaking practices for that, do you see those big guys like Gallo and Constellation trying to jump on that bandwagon too? And are they just going to cheat? You know what I mean? It's like to make that organic wine in a gigantic scenario, it just seems impossible.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be greenwashing. If we see it in our agricultural system, or if we see it in our corporate products outside the wine industry, we're going to see it in the wine industry too, and that does go on. But that's human nature, and certainly human nature in a capitalistic society to want to, like, ooh, how can we capitalize on this trend, right? So, but that's to be expected. That's how the system is set up, and so, I can't really worry about that. I have to just kind of, that's the reason why I go to vineyards specifically, to vet the producers that I do, because you can walk into a vineyard and in the spring and see an orange afro racing stripe running down, the vineyard row. And it's either an organic herbicide or it's glyphosate. It's one of the two. And so, that starts to raise a lot of flags as to how people are progressing with
Yeah.
what they do. And so I think in a way, my wine club is almost a consumer advocacy campaign, and just kind of reporting back to people is like, this is how this person's doing it, and this is why this is important, and from an environmental perspective, more than any tasting notes or wine critical.
Well, and so
Yeah.
and discuss Vitico a little bit, just a little bit further, so people know that are listening. Exactly.
It's my business. It's a wine club, and I kind of alluded to it before. I wanted to start this thing where I travel. There's an online business where I do custom bottlings, but since then it's just become a front for environmental issues. I've kind of become an environmental crusader in the process, as part of my growth. And like I said, the business is here to develop me. So I had an existential crisis with wine fairly recently, because our food chain is broken, and here we are clearing land of either a lively field of flowers and forbs, or a forest and planting a vineyard. in its place, removing all the life of it just to grow a crop that's not even food. It's just luxury product, and most of it is chemically farmed. And so it's like, oof, that's like, how do I even stay in this industry? And with the new set of values that I have, that just doesn't equate for me. And so what I realized with terms like biodynamic farming, we wouldn't have any relationship with the word biodynamic if it wasn't for wine, because Rudolf Steiner, who was kind of the founder of that philosophy, did not drink alcohol. He didn't believe in alcohol. It's probably rolling over in his grave that wine blew up that idea. But the reason it did is because when you're talking about farming techniques, there's not a lot of tourism around a soybean farm. And there's actually not a lot of tourism in the food industry. You go to a restaurant, unless it's like a really intense farm to table experience, which is usually a net worth scenario. You're not going to like be able to teach concepts of regenerative agriculture at a restaurant. But what you can do is where grapevines are spilling up into a tasting room, you have a giant opportunity to have teachable moments with new ideas of farming that spill over into our food chain, and there's a reason. Before that reason, biodynamics blew up. A lot of Burgundy producers embraced it, and people started reporting about it, and people are tasting wine and visiting wineries, and they're like, what is this biodynamic thing? And the word spreads from there. And so I feel like if we're going to tackle climate change, and ag is arguably, but you can make a fantastic case that it is the most important thing to tackle in the environmental fight that we're facing right now.
Absolutely.
That wine probably has the loudest megaphone.
No question about it. Because I mean, it's the only thing that has magazines that people read to be entertained, as opposed to just learning.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So
a sensory experience that could actually connect to farming ideas, which is crazy. Like if we looked at wine just not as grapes, the same thing we do with cooking. Like if you're making like a risotto, it's not just rice. Like there's other things in that risotto.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes you put truffles in. Like in the wine world, it would be like just making rice and someone added truffles to the risotto. They'd be like, oh my God, you just ruined the terroir of that dish by cooking it that way. Like no one would say that. But with wine, it's like, if you had Pinot Noir and you also had cider apples on your farm, and you decide to blend Pinot and cider, people would be like, that's not wine. But people are starting to do this.
Yeah.
We have just scratching the surface of flavor combinations of multiple fruits, and people will not take that seriously who have this kind of cultural inertia around what wine should be. But that whole idea is rooted in almost kind of like a white supremacist idea of monoculture. I mean, you think of like taking one grape and putting it in a vineyard and stripping all the life out of that vineyard so that one crop, that one species can become abundant. It's not qualitatively abundant, but it is quantitatively abundant. Like that is like exactly a white supremacist scenario. That is not what our culture needs. It's not what our
no.
So examples like there's crossover in the fields and crossover on the asphalt of our urban towns, and the environmental impacts that we make are perfect models for what's happening in our society with lack of integration. We need everybody. We need all hands on deck. And God, like the more cultural richness you have around you, it just shapes who you are and makes such a more fascinating, interesting society. And so I genuinely feel like if we're not so locked into one grape and one thing, then all these farmers are now incentivized to have multiple cropping systems and polyculture in their vineyards. And what's really crazy is 50% of the fruit that goes into a market is thrown away because we want blemish-free fruit.
Wow.
Right.
Everybody knows if they've eaten an heirloom tomato, that ugly ass, gnarly looking thing is delicious compared to your typical perfect orange tomato.
Right.
And everybody's seen like a shriveled raspberry growing in the wild and they pick it like I did today. the flavor's insane. It doesn't compare to the Driscoll berries that look perfect and are huge.
Right.
It doesn't compare. And so, the thing is, like, organic farming is so hard because if you get, these blemished fruits out of not, controlling the system heavily with whatever extractive methods, including herbicide and everything else, to try to get these steroided fruits, you can't really sell that fruit as a produce person. But in the wine industry or the cider industry, it's those fucked up gnarly apples and berries that we want to ferment with, that are super delicious because all the nutrients and flavors are concentrated heavily there. And so there's opportunities for, I think, wine and cider industry and fermentation in general to help out the food chain and potentially create partnerships, which I'm starting to see. Like orchards that sell produce are now planting cider apples that cider places are utilizing.
And right. So a lot of people don't know. I mean, cider was the thing in the US forever and ever, right? Apples were where it was at, right? Back in the day.
Yeah.
And you also recently, well, you're up and you moved up right before COVID hit to begin kind of a passion project with that, didn't you?
I did. I went back east and visited Andy Brennan, who wrote a book called Uncultivated and really goes deep into our history about America. Visited Vermont, a few producers up there, Fable Farm and La Garagista. And I feel like that whole area for fermentable anything is probably the most progressive area I've seen in the entire world. As
in Vermont.
In Vermont and parts of New York and back east, I think is doing incredible things, especially Vermont, because they're just so unafraid. And it's such well,
it's very progressive. I mean, it's like they've always have been, and
that's a wild,
that's one of the most beautiful areas in the world.
Yeah.
But you know what though? Okay, so I like, with all this being said, and it's fascinating, but what are you drinking like now? Like, are you like, is wine like an old like your old cassette tapes? You like, I'd never listen to that again. I mean, it's like, I've been there, done that. Are you over it? Like,
well, it's
what
funny,
is it like? I've heard all those Beatles albums. I don't need to know. It's like, I did all those wines. I'm over it. It's like, it sounds like you kind of are. What are you drinking? Do you drink this stuff anymore?
I drink more kombucha than I drink anything else. And like, I've had GI issues. I have gut issues.
Yeah.
That have manifested. And so this kind of path
from drinking wine, you think?
It certainly didn't help things. You're 2 a.m. and X bottles deep, and you just lie down after slamming whatever food you needed to soak that alcohol up. That was not helpful. I have chronic acid reflux, and my body doesn't metabolize alcohol well, and so I drink way less than the kind of industry standard, whatever that is.
Yeah, well,
which is intense alcoholic.
I was like,
that would be like 2 days from a meeting.
Dude, I mean, there's a lot of functioning people in our industry.
Yeah, but, I'd say.
I think towards that end, really, what wine should be, if I'm to see a future for it, is it to be like an alcoholic kombucha, this probiotic beverage where natural CO2 is trapped. You're not using industrial sulfur to preserve the wine. You're actually utilizing CO2, which is naturally, it's not forced carbonated, it's natural byproduct of fermentation to preserve that wine. It's not filtered, so it's a little bit cloudy. It looks probiotic. Sometimes it might look like a lava lamp in the same way that kombucha can if you shook it up.
Yeah.
But I really want wine to be almost like a herbal, old school pharmacy herbal elixirs.
Fernet Branca.
Oh boy.
That's kind of the idea, right? Where you actually have botanicals and other things that can come into play that are actually connected to health and potentially a wider array of flavor potential. And if those things exist out in your vineyard naturally, then it really becomes a forage scenario. And that's really the lesson of Vermont and New York and some of these places back east, is they're foraging for a lot of this stuff that was abandoned from Thomas Jefferson's era. They're these trees at the edge of forests, and they're wild, uncultivated trees with insane flavors. And the reason why is because, it was an abandoned orchard, right? And different livestock roll by each year on this abandoned orchard, eating the fruit. They go out in the forest and they shit the fruit out,
Yeah.
and seeds come up. And those seedlings, so if you took like a Fuji apple, let's say, and planted those 5 seeds, those 5 seeds would be a completely different species than the Fuji apple, and they'd be a completely different species than themselves.
Wow.
And so there's a genetic progression with wine and with cider that was halted because we stopped planting from seed.
Yeah.
Seeing what came up and propagating that. And we've cryogenically frozen the progression. So now our world has progressed, climate's different, new diseases are in the air, and the genetic progression of apples and grapes has not caught up with that. And so we're replanting vineyards every 40, 50 years. The things that used to survive from old California, these ancient vineyards, are often own rooted, and they're often field blends of a bunch of different varieties. These are the things that survive. And so
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of reasons for resilience, and, for, especially in these times when climate is accelerating so rapidly, we need to think differently about how we're potentially architecting a vineyard or an orchard.
Well, you know what?
Sorry, one thing real quick, Patrick. Sulfites. Well, we touch. A lot of people don't know exactly when they see that. People are like, "Oh, this is sulfite free."
But okay, and my question plays into what Q just said. For all those people that go, "Yeah, man, this is a graft from Romani Conti, and they're growing it in Santa Barbara," it's like, well, that's like, you can't have the conditions of like all this stuff. It's going to be a completely different change, and I just and then what Q was saying about the sulfites, it's like that would change the grape entirely, wouldn't it? And like, you can't have Romani Conti in Santa Barbara if you're not in Romani Conti.
Well, and for those that don't know what graphing is, right? There's
Yeah.
people out there that may not know exactly what graphing is, right?
Yeah, I mean, grafting is so basically, you have 2 families of grapes. You have vinifera, which is if you know any wine grape, it's probably a vinifera grape, because Pinot Noir, Cabernet, Chardonnay, these are all vinifera grapes. But
European.
they're not on their own roots. It's not just like a plant that goes in the ground. They're on Lambrusca, which is an entirely different family of grapes, rootstock.
Yeah.
And so that's because of disease, phylloxera. Lambrusca is resistant, and that includes all of Europe. They were devastated with this aphid was like, the World War Z for grapevines.
Yeah.
Destroyed their economy, and they had to plant on American rootstock, which is Lambrusca, in order to grow back their industry, because once that phylloxera bug came over there, it was lights out. So you have this Frankenstein monster already, where Lambrusca and vinifera have different nutrient needs.
Yes.
And so can there be situations where we have hybrids on their own roots, or we start experimenting with Lambrusca or vinifera on its own roots in specific sandy places where phylloxera can't get to it, or we start these seedling projects, right, where things are grown from seed, that takes it to another level altogether. And so I think if we can get out of our preconceived notions about what wine should be and what we want to impose upon the land, then we can really, really start to make true progress.
Right. Okay.
I think progress is rooted in the primitive. Strangely, most of our progress should be rooted in the primitive, and all the progress we are making environmentally, et cetera, it's like a back to the future movement. It's like a future primitive movement. We're actually going backwards and figuring out what was lost in this game of telephone from generation to generation. As we progress in one area, what did we lose? The part that we lost is essential.
And can you touch on sulfites again real quick?
Yeah, so sulfites, those are naturally occurring no matter what, but when we're talking about sulfur additions to preserve wine, now we're starting to get into industrial sulfur, which is it's a waste product of oil refineries. And I think that for people who use a lot of sulfur, they can at least start by working a lot more minimally. Viticul's in the process of going completely sulfur free. If you walk into a grocery store and you see that mist and there's like those thunder clouds that go off in the produce section. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's sulfur spray preserving that fruit. It's not just water, you know? And so sulfur is everywhere, and people spray it in the vineyard too. So even if you don't spray it in the cellar, it's there. It's a pesticide. It's what some consider a natural pesticide, but it is a waste product of oil refineries. And so as we start to talk about winding all these things back to wine's essence of just grapes and the yeast that's in the vineyard and ambient in your cellar, and just that, wine ends up tasting a lot differently than our normal taste preferences will allow for. So in a lot of ways, it's a big ask of my wine club to go in this direction, because the flavors that come out of natural wine at that level are completely different.
Wow.
And it starts to emulate kombucha at that point, because the
Just
wine is
super acidy.
alive. And sometimes the fermentation is still going on in bottle. And some would scoff at that. I do not, because that's health right there, and that's life. I don't want to strip that out of wine, because I truly feel it can be a healthful product. And that difference can teach us about what's not on the label,
Right?
Which are the ingredients. And unfortunately, there are a lot of war crimes that go on in ingredients, even at the highest level, and sometimes especially at the highest level, because they got so many dollars at stake that they're doing a lot of weird things in the cellar to preserve that homogenized product and making it taste exactly the same from year to year.
Yep. And
Wow.
a lot of people don't realize that. It's just, they think, oh, winemaking, oh, it's just this. They
I
don't.
got about 6% on my computer and no plug. So
well, that's okay.
All right.
I think we're getting close to the end of that. So anyway, which is fantastic. Patrick, what do you got? Well, any last thoughts?
Okay, last thought. I got to go back to the nerd wine thing. Most contrived thing that people would say to you over in the wine world, like stupid, for example, mine would be when somebody says, "Oh, this wine has great mouthfeel." It's like, come on, you know what I mean? It's just like what was the most contrived wine shtick that you were like, okay, I'm getting out of it. I got to get out of this.
There's so many.
I know. That's what I'm saying. But it's like when somebody says mouthfeel to me, I mean, that's everything. It's like, this air really is, it's got the O2 they're always talking about.
Got an airy feel.
Honestly, people, Patrick, and this is going to sound diplomatic, but everybody's on the path, and wine is so intimidating. If they want to go through that, they can go through that world.
I knew you'd say something cool.
Everybody's on a different part of the mountain, and I'm not gonna
stop bowling, Patrick. You're such a bully.
I'm not going to take that easy. It's an easy target.
I know. Okay. And I'm not asking
Patrick naturally bullies me. If you watch enough shows, he's always bullying me. So
but I do agree with you in general, Patrick, that the pretension of wine should be stripped out. And it's like, does it taste good? And I think honestly, my mom has the best palate of anybody I've ever met, because she has no label preference. There's no pretension at all. I could serve her a $500 bottle of wine. It doesn't mean anything to her, and she's just like, yeah, I hate that, or I like that.
Mom's always figured out.
She's keeping it real, and 99% of the time she's like, wow, like the level of wine is maybe this much better, and you can tell. She can tell. She's like, oh, this one's slightly better than that one. I like it a little better. And it's like, there's just no BS at all, Yeah,
well, her taste buds.
She's just like, this is this.
Yeah, she's Syrian, obviously, right? So like her evolution is like 1 billion years old. So obviously, you know what I mean? She can this, where I'm like, this tastes like good. But yeah, no, that's great. That's great.
By the way, that's my favorite one, by the way, Patrick. Oh, how did you like the wine? Oh, it's good. Anytime I hear good, that's my.
But I'm cool with good. I'll take good better over anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is great, Brian. Thanks for hanging out with us. Really cool story. Real quick before you run out of juice, tell people where you're at, your wine club, and all that stuff. So we make sure that whoever watches this, and we'll put it up. We'll put it on the site too.
It's viticalwine.com, VITICOLE wine.com, and there's 2 tiers. There's like a tier for $25 to $35 retail wines, and then there's another tier for $40 to $60 wines. You go to the website and click on the club sign up it should be pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, that's that.
And on Instagram, if they want to follow you there right now.
Oh yeah, it's well, it's
going to change. You're going to change that.
It's at Brian McClintic MS right now, but I have to wait for Instagram to change the letters, and so they're a little slow getting back to me right now.
Yeah, the MS part. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, listen.
At Vitical Wine is my business. So.
Perfect.
Cool. Very cool.
Well, I tell you what, it's been an honor and a pleasure, man. You know what? I mean, I've met you, we met a while ago, but over the last couple of phone calls we've had, and obviously this experience here, man, I'm looking forward to seeing you out here and get down with Mike and Alicia and have some wine and have some dinner. Yeah. And man, and I'm going to keep tabs on your business and what you've got going up there. It's really impressive. And we're just really grateful for the time you spent in teaching and dropping some knowledge, man. And God bless you, man. You've done amazing things. You've done a really great thing for a lot of people. And I'm really impressed with what you've done, man.
Well, you know what? And the thing is, for the amount of people you motivated to get into wine, it's like, hopefully your motivation continues and you motivate people to do the right thing with like the earth, agriculture, less poison, all that stuff. You know, I mean, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of possibilities, and it's, good for you, which is something great. So, any last words from you, Big B?
No, it's just really good to catch up with you, man. I'm really glad Michael and Alicia connected us again. They're salt of the earth people, and I love them dearly. And it was really great chatting with both of you.
Awesome. Yeah, you too, man.
Patrick,
pleasure was ours.
Patrick, great job, buddy. Appreciate you.
Q. I didn't even tell the story about when I got poison oak on my face. Did you ever see the movie Mask?
Yeah.
It was pretty fun. I'm not exaggerating.
Wow.
So, except I didn't learn any. There was no big lesson for me to learn. Don't put poison oak on my face. That was the lesson.
Well, I appreciate it, Patrick. Well done. And everybody watching out there, just keep it in mind. We do Mindful Mondays every Monday night, 7 p.m., different conversations. Open your mind. That's the idea. And then also we've got Throwdown Thursdays. We do a comedy show, 8 p.m. on Thursdays. Come check it out. Everybody have an amazing time again, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Everybody out there, thank you for watching. And Q loves you. Out.
Yeah.
Good night, guys.
Later, guys. Cheers.